All right. Perfect. All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Tech and Brews chat series, video podcast where we help break down tech jargon, understand why it matters to you, your team, and the bottom line. So our guest today is Paul Brews, who is the head of incubation engineering at Tricentis and founder of Grow Logistics. So Paul, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you so much, man. I work a full-time job, have a family, have a full-time life there. And then also I do a bunch of other stuff in the Boston area around particularly the DevOps scene, not the hashtag DevOps scene, but like the real people who are actually having to figure out what that means on a daily basis. We just got done with DevOps Days Boston 2021, which is a virtual event this year again. Second year in a row where it was virtual. Really fantastic turnout, really good engagement. Tried different things, learned different stuff. But yeah, I mean, in my full-time job, I work with teams all over the world because Tricentis is all over the world. And, sometimes I'll start my morning at 5 a.m., right, for the French team. And then some days, hopefully not the same ones, I'll end my day at like 9:30 for like the Australian teams. So it's very interesting. Hopefully I'll get over to Australia at some point when things calm down. Hopefully they do, because I'd also like to visit my friend in Japan. So
That's awesome. You'd certainly deserve it, to keep in that schedule. So that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I know we initially got connected through us both, working or being involved in the observability space. I'm curious, like, how did you get involved in, the DevOps days, observability for that matter, kind of in this world of, what you're leaving at OTel now?
Yeah. So let's see. DevOps continuous delivery came out in like something around 2008-ish, 9-ish, when we started to coin the term, but people didn't really pay attention until 2012, 13. By 2014, I was trying to help business people understand what is the DevOps at an early pace, and then really starting to realize the the good thing about DevOps is that it's a journey. And maybe some people might want to stick to the origin of it, which is just developers and operations-ers people. But as it turns out, there's a lot of good learnings that went into that. I remember last time you and I spoke, we were talking about books here and there, The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, Beyond the Goal, his lectures, just a whole bunch of organizational theory. Had a chance in the past month to speak to some people who I would consider, like, I had to turn my like fear, uncertainty, and doubt off on that have written other books in that space who are still alive. And I don't want that knowledge to just kind of be railroaded by the past without me understanding it really thoroughly and actually engaging with that. So for the past about 10 years, I have been on a very deep and serious learning journey that required me to step out of my comfort zone as a dev, right? I've been prying chips out of computers since I was 9 years old, hearing those opcodes, the beeps that happen when you don't have the right, EEPROM plugged in, and it feeling like systems were designed to speak to me as a 9-year-old, just thinking like, wow, somebody made this for me, right? That's just for me, of course. But the point was, like, that was a seed of curiosity that got planted very deeply. And due to some inherited privilege and quite frankly, I just never thought to not seek knowledge. Throughout the career, I've realized, it wasn't enough just to sit in a cubicle and code. I still do that. I'm still doing that. Hey, even for the small things like we were talking about, transcoding the DevOps Days captions to merge human and AI so we get the right, time signatures and stuff. I mean, all day long. Last year, I was helping out a ton with the command line interface over on the Neoload platform. But the point here is, like, I had to move away from just coding. There's nothing wrong with people who just love shiny tech and that's what they want to do. That's cool. But I knew that there was more for me. And
Mm.
so I worked, I said, let's try this sales engineering thing. Let's try being a product marketing manager. Let's learn the business. Let's understand what these software companies, how they work, how they function, how they dysfunction, right? And
Mm.
figuring out what is and it all comes down to a mantra I have, which is, how can I have the most material impact to the people around me and to myself? And that happens on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-by-moment basis. It happens weekly, monthly, right? I do my own checksums at those various different intervals, but it really drives me to ask the question, am I doing the right things?
Mm.
So being able to, it's not just enough to like think about what do you want to do with yourself, given what you know. There's far more that you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the DevOps space, uh, there's a lot of information, a lot of disinformation at this point. And I see the same thing happening sort of with observability, where it's like, slap observability on your thing, and now it's an observability tool. And it's like, it's not like we came with an agile manifesto, which arguably was wrong too. It was like poorly conceived to begin with as well.
Right.
But just like many documents that are put in time, it's a point in time. It's a, hey, it might be better than what we had before, but it's not like a perfect and infinitely continuing thing. We need to improve it. And so that's why I find certainly the people that I get to hang out with in the DevOps meetup in Boston, which I help organize, and deeply involved in that community, there is at least a non-zero number of people who have that sort of seed of curiosity, seed of continuous learning. And then right around in 2016, I answered the call to a couple of people who were working with the IEEE, who had gone through standards. And, standards are a lot like what they say about laws and sausages. Nobody wants to know how either are made. Well, standards are tricky too. And there's it sparks a lot of holy wars about like, well, isn't DevOps supposed to be what you make it? So why would there be a standard for that? No, the standard's more about plugging in to an understanding that people have from slightly the past, not so much waterfall, but sort of like the systems and processes and life cycle of software as defined by prior standards, and figuring out in every single one of those things, human resources, supply, acquisition, transition process to production, disposal, quality management, quality assurance, quality control, these various different both project enabling processes and technically enabling processes. Those are like lumbar. Those are parts of the backbone of what people know, and is a holistic view of how to do software, or what should be involved. What should you be thinking when you're going through large scale software, especially for large organizations and high compliance organizations typically need these standards to make sure that they're on track. So what we had to do was we had to go through every single one of those. And I mean, it took 4 years, man. Like this wasn't, it sounds waterfall to be like 4 years, but standards usually take about 3 years from start to finish. And it took about that. And it's now an approved standard. It's called IEEE 2675 2021. And what we did with every single one of those sections was we said, how is this different in DevOps? How should you be thinking about the supply and acquisition process? And it goes all the way, even, I mean, not the standard itself, but the question might lead you to think all the way down to any time I pull from NPM, or when I go grab a Maven update, like something from Maven, right? That is a acquisition process. Who's supplying that stuff? I mean, hopefully you're using something like Sonatype and their validated registries. But the point is, like, it's super easy to just get software now, but it's like, wait a second, supply chain attacks are a real deal. Not to mention performance and reliability considerations. I think Honeycomb just went through one of those Kafka issues, right? And I love that y'all did like a retro and what we learned, and people should be doing that all the time, right? Like most companies should be doing those kind of retros, because it helps us all understand not just what not to do, but how awesome a company is that can not only like fix a problem and hide it, but maybe actually fix a problem and demonstrate their extreme knowledge about what needed to occur and by the way, what they can do better next time, right? So
Right.
and that's very DevOpsy, right? So I've been talking a lot, but you also mentioned how did I get involved in observability, so I can talk about that too.
No, yeah, that's totally fine. I mean, like, and I feel like it's hard to broach or talk about the topic of observability without first establishing some kind of baseline of DevOps, right? And so I feel like that line of thinking is right along that way. I think like one of the uh, one of the things we kind of hit on, right? And this is totally us jumping off a cliff here into Pandora's box, but I know there's a lot of opinions on this today. And you already kind of broached the topic of companies taking the term observability, slapping it on there and calling it, their offering. But what does observability mean to you? What is the definition in your mind?
Um, well, I usually try to listen to the giants, right? People who their thoughts demonstrate how giant their thoughts are. And, I would just asked over LinkedIn for a quote about what is observability. And I had the first thing I was like, hey, you know what? Charity said it best, right? Observability is being able to ask questions of your system.
Right.
And it's really good because not only does it's not what is like, what library do I use or what technically it is, but what is the outcome, and it almost answers its own question. Why is it meaningful? So that's nice. I recently remember the quote about from Andy Clay Schaefer about the DevOps you get as a DevOps you deserve. And I've been really thinking about that from an observability perspective too. The observability you get is the observability you deserve. The only problem with that, though it's funny, the only problem with that is we inherit systems that have very poor observability. You cannot
Mm,
ask new questions of your systems without meaningfully changing them or buying a new thing or doing a whole bunch of stuff, which itself, even if you're just changing, you're just adding a log line, you never know how that's going to affect your performance or reliability. You never know how many other changes have to be batched up together just to get that one thing out there, and now you're waiting like 2 weeks for this thing. So it's not that easy. It's not easy to, if you don't uh, and I think exactly what I said was, um, I think this is worth mentioning real quick. There it is. So I said adding to all that stuff, right? For me, curiosity and rapid answers can only be satisfied by systems intentionally designed to emit information that's useful to both its operators and its benefactors.
that's
Benefactors
good.
being
That's good.
business people, right? Like it is about the technical part of emitting information, but
Mm,
just emitting information. I'm going through one called The Social Life, a book called The Social Life of Information.
mm,
And even just in chapter 2, they make a really great point about it's not more information that we need, right? Even if you have perfect information, which is impossible, right?
mm.
Infinite and perfect information in the world by 2057 or something like that, you still end up with imperfect decision processes, imperfect interpretations, and so on and so forth. So that's not to say that we shouldn't have better information at the table, but information itself is not the only solution. It's a substrate of the things that go back to what Charity was suggesting, which is
Right.
if you constantly have to think, I've got a new question and I don't have the right data in place, I don't have the right systems that were intentionally designed to
Mm,
make it easy to inject even new stuff without
mm.
majorly disrupting operations or service or having to do a big release or something,
Right.
then you end up with a situation where really cannot ask new questions of the systems.
No,
So
you're shooting in the dark. Yeah.
yeah.
On.
So the thing about that, what you get is what you deserve. I don't. I think it's funny, but I also don't totally agree with that. Like I started to say, it's like we inherit these systems.
Mm,
So I don't, unless somebody is greenfield developing a system, to be as obscure as it can possibly be. Maybe there's some situations where that might be the case, but for most of the software industry, we want better information from our systems. And so the question is not like, do you deserve this crappy you don't deserve on call without enough information at the table. Come on.
Right.
Nobody deserves that. On
Right.
the other hand, if you're not seeking, going back to DevOps, continuous learning and improvement, the Kaizen, right? If you're not seeking, every time you're hit by something, if you're not seeking an opportunity to say, how do we change this? How do we improve this for the next person? Whether it's myself or somebody else, then what are you doing? What are you even doing in the industry? And
Yeah.
there's a point at which it's kind of like you got to cut your losses, because like if you've been up for 16 hours and there's still a problem and you get over it, how likely are you to spend the extra half hour logging the ticket just to be perfect about your description about what needs to change, only to find that there's never any bandwidth for it for yourself
Right.
or for your team? So that has to change too. And that's why the DevOps people, process, and technology to me is such a fundamental, it's always in my mind, is, you know, when something's proposed, when a change is proposed, I'm not just thinking how great the technology is. I'm also thinking, just like Goldratt might say, the 4 questions. What's the power of the new technology? Right? That's important to know. Absolutely. And then you have to pause the salespeople because they'll go on and on, like I will, about the awesome things that I like. You got to pause them and say, okay, but the next step is what limitations does this new technology help you overcome? And if you say something like, well, better communication, well, no, that's not answering the question. If the question is not about the first thing, the question is about you, about your people, process, and technology end body problem, is what limitations are you struggling under that help that limit you, right? What limitations does the thing supposed to overcome? Because if you don't understand what that limitation is, you can't answer the third question, which is, what are the rules that you have in place culturally, like people, process, technology rules, that prevent you from actually, even if you did acquire this new open source or this new paid for platform or whatever, you still wouldn't be able to really get the benefit out of it because you run smack into the fundamental problem, which is people don't always pay attention to new information. People take training and so on and so forth. And then the last question he has is, okay, well, if there are rules in place that allow you to live in this dysfunctional world that you're in now, the not so optimal world, what new rules do you have to put in place to make sure, I mean, he doesn't go this far, but to make sure that the old rules don't come creeping back in, or to make sure that the new rules, to make sure that the power of the technology is fully understood, realized, and is encouraged and aligned all the way through
Right.
the people,
Right.
process, and technology hierarchies. So
Yeah, I think I love your description of the people, process, and technology, right? Because I think so often, on the sales side and on the engineering side, like you see a shiny new tool, and it's like, you think you found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It'll solve all your problems. And even if you did find the perfect tool, the imperfect human will ruin it, right? So it's kind of like there's no such thing, right? Because you can't remove the people, process, technology. It's always one package.
yeah.
However, I really like the mindset you approach the technology world in, because you approach it with, hey, there's baggage, right? There's humans and process attached to that. I know one of the big, pieces, if we're going to go on the technology block that you're focused on, is open telemetry, right? You've already talked about how important it is to be able to have the data emitted from your systems, whether they're modern or legacy, in one place. You can actually make the process and people on, making decisions in the right way in the right place. Talk to us a little bit about like open telemetry and why that's been such a big focus for you. Curious to know your thoughts there.
Well, when I was first paying attention to it, I think I want to say in like mid 2019, where I was like, it was still, there was a congealing of open census and open tracing into OTel, open telemetry. I thought that was interesting. I thought, first off, if CNCF, Apache, whatever it is, Linux friendly, who cares, right? But if people who have the maintainer and the contributor bug that, that they really want to do that spirit. If separate groups can get together and agree about something, right? That's a first sign of like, what's going on over there? That's
There's
pretty
something
cool.
here. Yeah.
Because I remember like back in 2015, having very close and ground floor knowledge about what was happening in the API space, specifically around API descriptors like Swagger, and then watching it be sort of put in foundation as open API. It started way earlier than that. It started as a great idea from WordNick, right? From a couple of folks at WordNick. And it took a long time to get adopted. Like the curve, it took a long time before some people were paying real attention to it. And there was effort that was put in organically to get people, like for instance, at big companies like Cap One or so, to really pay attention to that. And as soon as those big companies were like, wow, this could really help us, mass adoption occurred. Almost not overnight, but like over the very short period of time. So there was a huge hockey stick of this notion of, and there was consolidation, by the way. There was what was it? Apiary had an API blueprint. We get RAML from MuleSoft. There were a couple of others in the space. And it eventually led to, there's generally a good way to do this, right? And it was less of a format war afterwards, as it was, we all have to standardize on something, right? So when I see OTel and I see all the contributors in that space and have a spirit of community, one of the first things that the second signal was, I was talking with some people who are not in the technical part of it, but still really important to communications around it, both in Lightstep and Honeycomb. I was like, so, who do I have to talk to if I want to do an event and I want them to reshare a thing, these social handles, who do I talk to the social handles? And they were like, oh, any one of us. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, we share responsibility on that thing. What? Different people from vendors that are non-technical that share a handle? What is this, like a vendor grab bag? And then I looked back on the Twitter handle and there is nothing vendor related on it. And I was like, holy crap, wait a second. They can follow rules. They can be polite to each other and they're kind of semi-competitive. Holy crap. What? That's just like, what is this thing? And so that was like a second signal. Also, I mean, people like Liz Funk Jones, just amazing stuff. I've been reading the SRE book for many years. So, various different people in that space just had the right spirit, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
yeah, there's always some contribution, collaboration from people who are 90% like doing it because trying to build something up in a career or maybe a vendor, but it's almost like there's enough antibodies in that space. And what I realize now after thinking through this is the reason for that is because the architecture was thought through on both the technical side as well as the business side. If they were all, if we have all been working to just build a completely open and like, not just the formats, but like, here's the full thing, go and run it at large scale in an organization, nobody would make money.
Yeah.
What would the value, like if I can just run this stuff all by myself at massive scale, Cap One can do that, right? A lot of really forward thinking institutions can do that now. So what value would it have for any of the vendors in the space? And so the interesting thing was that it doesn't ship with a backend. Yes, I mean, you can use Prometheus and Grafana and stuff to get some basic stuff, but scalability about that stuff is really tricky, right? So the value prop is still there for the vendors. Oh, by the way, many of the vendors do have people who are part-time, like actually contribute meaningfully to the open spec, not twisting their mustaches or anything. Like, you got Dan Dyla at Dynatrace. What a great guy, working on the JavaScript and Node.js, I think Node.js or JavaScript implementation. There's a whole bunch of people from other companies too that like are in it for their own purposes as well, not just because they're hired by somebody. So those are the reasons that attracted me to the community. From a technical perspective, I think it's absolutely brilliant to level the playing field and say, let's stop doing stupid holy wars and like asking developers to embed custom libraries, like vendor specific libraries in their code. How damn dumb is that? Except for that's what we've been living with for so many years. That was just like, oh,
it's what you know. It's the devil you know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was even working with a large legal customer a couple of years ago that had been doing their own tracing, their own distributed tracing, like their own libraries from scratch. That not, I mean, they could rip it out to APM if they needed to, but it was like they had owned this problem before anybody was really approaching the distributed tracing problems like this. And I think especially with additional layers of obfuscation, just push you to need better distributed tracing, right?
Right.
And those obfuscation layers I'm specifically talking about are containers in Kubernetes. It's just another layer on top of a VM somewhere, on top of a data center, on top of a network that you don't control. Inside, ooh, what about serverless, right? Well, we just had a couple of serverless talks at DevOps Days Boston about this. By the way, with that, tickets are free, or you could donate, right? You donate and the tickets go to a couple of really good causes. So even after the event, it's worth it. So the serverless thing, right, is just one level beyond container, if you will, in terms of minutia, in terms of the smaller function of a thing.
Right.
We don't need observability on that stuff. No, the smaller it gets, the more observability you need. That's why when you watch somebody try to crack open one of these Macs to fix them themselves in a big Mac store, in a big Mac repair place in like New York City, you'll see them have to crack out practically an electron microscope. I mean, it's not that, but you have to get better tools to see deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
And you need to adopt principles and practices that help you do that. So when it comes to the vendor agnosticism of the APIs, the standards, the formats, and all that layer, it's like a layer cake with open telemetry. That at least a significant portion of that is vendor agnostic, right? And then that allows everybody to play on a level playing field.
Yeah,
and it pushes all the platforms. If you want to do something really meaningful, you have to do something meaningful. You have to provide some unique and differentiating value in your platform, because it's not the stickiness of your libraries and somebody else's code anymore. Right. And I love that. I absolutely love it. It's almost like it was a nice way for Honeycomb, Lightstep, and a few other people in the early space to kind of go, and kind of get in and say, like, let's just get rid of this sticky crap that shouldn't be there.
The holy
let's
wars.
Actually compete with platform value.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah. By the way, that history of OTel was super interesting. I mean, I'm learning stuff as we're having this conversation. What I'm curious about is, so that there's some non-engineering folks, maybe on the product side or even on like the customer support side, things like that sometimes have to rub up against engineering teams on the telemetry of what customers have met or from their environments to understand how to move the ball forward. Feature releases, product, things like that. When I'm a non-technical person on the sales side, when I first heard about the ability to collect telemetry in one place in a vendor agnostic way, I'm like, cool. But how does that matter to the business? What does that allow product teams to do? How does it impact their features and releases, things like that? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So first off, you are a technical person, just not the way that most people say technical. Technical meaning what? You cut
technical being fingers on keyboard. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Well, your fingers are on keyboards. You're just sending emails to people who really need your help, and you're also probably in Salesforce or Sugar CRM, whatever. I don't care. But like,
I wish there were more people like you, Paul. That's good stuff, man.
The point is, if you think about technical as deeply invested in something, right? If I can bend the term for a second there, which is not a bend, that you are that for your cares and concerns, for what you have to do, what role you play. And I've had, talked about the career about like going from dev to like sales engineer to back to dev, back to, and so on and so forth. One of the things that I'm maybe disappointed in humans is a little bit heavy-handed, but I'm always a little bit disappointed when I hear somebody be like a developer be like, oh, I hate sales guys. Or how about a salesperson being like, oh man, those devs, like, they're just so confusing and I don't know how to talk to them. It's so frustrating. It's fair, but also the emotion is fair. But also the fact is, like, that's because of a lack of empathy.
Yeah,
You
100%.
only have so much empathy in your life, so you can only spend it in the right places. But if somebody has got their cares and concerns and they really want to actually effectively do that, the best way to do that is to be deeply, what one of my prior bosses said was ruthlessly invested in the other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at least for conversations, right, to try to understand how can I help you,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a great question to ask,
Mm-hmm.
either internally, right, towards that person or people or that organization, or maybe even verbally, right? And not in a way that's like, what problem are you trying to solve? It's how can I help you is a different thing than what problem are you trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think, what was the question?
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. So the question is, like, for non-engineering folks, right? For the people who may not be in the code each day, right?
Yep.
That don't understand, like, the tooling and worlds of DevOps and automation and observability, right? But they're more speaking in terms of the revenue and feature releases and customer adoption, right? When they hear about the ability of, like, oh, we can collect telemetry in one spot and we can do it in a vendor-agnostic way, when they hear that, it may be like, all right, so what, right? Like, how does that help me with my business goals? How does that get me further ahead with my product features and customer acquisition?
Right.
Yeah, like, how does Otel do that for customers, right? I'm curious because you have a good
Yeah.
connection between the business and the technical side here.
So let's play out the day in the life of a salesperson for just 10 seconds.
Sure, let's do it.
You're trying to help somebody move through, like, is this going to work or not? Right. And all of a sudden they're stuck with, oh, well, I can't install your library because I couldn't get out to the Maven or the whatever repo. And all this sort of technical stuff happens when the strategy is wrong, right? The strategy from the past day was get our special libraries and embed them because haha, that makes us stickier in your software. Well, there's a lot of challenges to that too. And so if you can make something easier to consume, if you can make something easier to start to see the value from, well, that's good for the technical persons. It's
Mhm.
also good for the business persons, right? The manager, yourself included, right? When people can go through POC cycles faster, that's better for everybody. When
Mhm.
you can get to the answer, and whether it's a highly technical question, right? I'm sure that you've got things where you just ping off, you get an email from somebody, you have no idea what they're talking about. 5 people you can forward that to, and can I get a technical answer to this, right? But the problem is if you just do that all day long, then you're just a middleman, right? And so how do we go from middlemen of information or middle people to being able to do this more effectively? Well, it's email snippets. You know what I mean? Like, not that everything's a cookie cutter, but it's kind of like you start to learn, oh, wait a second, I've heard that before. And it's not just I heard that before, because then you could go through, you'd have to bail through like 30,000 messages in Slack just to get that last one. So it's like information just overwhelms all the time, but it's how do you consolidate that stuff up? And make it easy for you to then reuse and refer and get to their answer faster, right?
Mm.
Whether it's finding the right person inside their org or inside your org, right? That's better, and that's relationship building.
Mhm.
On the other side too, there's this culture that my friend Lynn Robert Carter mentioned first time I heard it, was this culture of write once, read never, right? People do the retros. They're like, oh, well, we did the retro, and then somebody wrote a retro doc, and then it's like, okay, but did that meaningfully change any of your checklists, your run books? Did you
Mm.
take work and then not actually do that work, that improvement, right? If you're only writing these things and moving on, and you're not actually baking that improvement in and taking just a little bit of time, 5% of your time per week, 10% of your time per week spread across the week should be, how do I improve this situation? How do I make it more scalable, more repeatable, right? How do I share this out with others in a meaningful way to them? That's the same concept there is, how do we go from, you know, OTel is a nice technology and all, but what does it get me? It gets you, there is a little cost you pay to get up and on to that thing. You're going to have to rewrite some things, right? There are some things you don't have to rewrite, but there's a point at which you do have to make that decision. But once you've made that decision, it's not plumbing. Nobody cares about plumbing. Sorry, except for plumbers and myself when things are broken. But you know what I mean? Like plumbing code, nobody gives a crap about that. That usually doesn't benefit your customer directly, right? That doesn't make you more money. So nobody usually cares about that. So my point is, OTel is not just plumbing. It's a really good idea. It's a paradigm shift in a way, away from constantly having to repair leaky plumbing. And leaky plumbing that only one person 10 towns away can solve for you, right? So that to me is what business people need to understand about, like, hey, Olliefest, go to olliefest.org and watch all the videos. Again, it's a, sign up for a ticket, you get access to the hub, you can watch all the videos. Observe2020.io, right? From 2 years ago, practically 2 years ago. There's a lot of really good business based. I usually do half the business cases for observability and open telemetry and half technical sessions, because we need to talk together better, right? So
yeah, love that. That's awesome. I appreciate you connecting the dots there, Paul. That's good stuff. I know we're up on time here, but any other kind of pieces here about, like, how to get in contact with you, how to learn more about what you're doing, either with Tricentis or, with the Olliefest stuff. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, you connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm handles Paul S as in Sam Bruce. On both of them, email is me at paulsbruce.io. Also, in my full-time work, I've transitioned from that person who cares deeply about performance and reliability and like helps customers, helps external people with that whole space, right? I've transitioned onto some other stuff. I still care deeply about performance and reliability. Don't worry. I'm going to be a performance nerd for the rest of my life for sure. But I've also transitioned onto doing a bit of work in incubation engineering, which comes from the thought around zoning, business zoning, particularly from Jeffrey Moore and a few other people. And so the gap there, right, which I'm also curious to anybody who's watching this, any of your subscribers, if you've worked in incubation engineering, or some people might call innovation, but like incubation is different than innovation in a software company. Innovation happens everywhere, or should happen everywhere. Small things, big things, things that climb on rocks. But also incubation is more of a purposeful, intentional function to say, let us make sure that we're doing due diligence and being receptive to the ideas in our company or outside the company that should be provided a little bit of space for. And it takes a little change of engineering culture as well in most organizations to make just a little bit more space for something. Some people do like 1 day a week that they get to go play on anything, but most people don't. So to figure out that balance, it's been really great to work with the Tricentis team, particularly on the product side as well. And just to be able to start to launch that function in a way that is intentional and purposeful, that opens it up to everybody in that organization. If you've ever worked in incubation engineering or ever worked with somebody like that, please reach out to me and let's share some stories, because I'm always interested in learning how to do that and do that better. But there is some really fun stuff. There's some really cool stuff that has a lot of the same characteristics that I talked about when it comes to OTel, right? The collaboration culture, the openness, the ability to provide more value than you consume kind of situation that's going to be coming out in the next year or so. So I'm really excited for some of that work.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. I always love an invitation for more collaboration, Paul. That's good stuff, man. So thank you again for just being willing to be a guest. It's great to get to chat with you. And we'll talk again soon, man.
Thank you, Nate. Ciao, everybody.